Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the NRG Oncology Podcast. I'm Lauren Henke, here with my co-host, Stephen Chun, and today we are going to talk about one of the most important considerations in clinical research, aside from the primary endpoint of a trial. So today we will be speaking about none other than patient advocacy within NRG Oncology. We are joined by Tambre Leighn, who is a patient advocate within NRG Oncology.
Thanks again for joining us. Can you tell us about how you became a patient advocate for NRG Oncology? Is there special training that you've undergone? And what are the specific requirements the cooperative group has for being a patient advocate? And how might someone who's interested in a role like this become a patient advocate?
First of all, thanks to you both for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about patient advocacy within NRG. After over a decade of advocacy experience, including working with organizations like the American Cancer Society, I joined NRG Oncology in 2022 at the invitation of a fellow advocate. Currently, I'm proud to serve as the co-vice chair of NRG's Patient Advocate Committee, and I also contribute to both the Communications Committee and the Cancer Care Delivery and Research Committee. And yes, in order to become an effective advocate, we definitely take part in different trainings, depending on the organizations that we're working with. And then also independently, where I find most of us are very dedicated and want to continue to expand our awareness and understanding of clinical research and ways that we can contribute to working with researchers to keep in mind the needs of patients. I'd say what I find most fulfilling about advocacy is the unique opportunity to influence meaningful changes in research. And through my company, Well Beyond Ordinary, I've had the privilege of merging my professional expertise in healthcare communications with my passion for patient advocacy. So this really allows me to push for improvements in how we educate and communicate with patients and ensure that clinical trial designs are not just scientifically sound, but truly patient-centric, culturally relevant, and accessible. And I feel like I speak for many of my fellow advocates that they bring skill sets from a wide range of areas in order to participate effectively as a patient advocate and support researchers within NRG and other organizations.
Many of us in NRG Oncology, I think, are aware of the existence of patient advocacy within our cooperative group. But I think fewer of us really understand the critical role and the work our advocates perform. Can you tell us about the basic mission of the NRG Oncology Patient Advocate Group and their work to protect and incorporate patient interests within clinical trials?
The value of the patient advocates at NRG Oncology is extensive, and there's many ways that we support researchers and the work in research and development of clinical trials. So as early as possible, advocates like to get involved even in the early stage of a study question being developed. And we're happy to work with researchers along the way, either individually or through the different committees that we participate in. So I would say that one of the areas that people are most aware of is the use of advocates to evaluate study proposals or concept designs. And we typically receive the information from the committees or from the researcher, and we look at it from a variety of different perspectives, asking a number of questions about what's being proposed, and then reflecting back feedback on any areas where we feel like there could be improvement to, for example, make a trial more accessible, to better understand the importance and relevance of the trial, to look at things like innovation and how that's being addressed within the concept for the trial. We also provide letters of support from time to time for researchers when there's a study that we are particularly involved with or want to see out there. And there's a lot going on in community engagement where we're sharing out information about clinical trials that are currently open for enrollment within the different patient advocacy communities that we're involved in outside of NRG.
So, as a patient advocate for NRG, could you tell us how you evaluate research study questions and concepts? How do you work with the principal investigators and other investigators to balance scientific needs with patient needs? Are there specific ways you advocate for a patient-friendly study design?
Absolutely. So when I receive a study design protocol, like a protocol or a concept, there are some key questions that I ask myself as I'm going through it. So I look at things like, how might this study improve the patient experience or outcomes? So as advocates, we want to understand the potential impact of the study on patient care, quality of life, overall health outcomes, and ensure that the research addresses the real patient needs. So I might also ask myself, what unmet need could this study address that's important to patients? And for some studies, as I mentioned, I may look at the level of innovation if that's important to that study. I also want to look at things like how well is the study designed to ensure the inclusion of diverse populations. We want to make sure that we're getting more inclusion of underrepresented groups. And then looking at what are the potential barriers for those diverse groups and also for all patients. So evaluating things like inclusion, exclusion criteria, the number of steps and procedures or tests or questionnaires, the informed consent form, how understandable is that to patients who are looking at enrolling in the trial, and logistical issues such as travel, time away from responsibilities, parking, access to information and support in multiple languages. So, definitely looking at barriers and then potential risks and benefits. So we need to understand, the risk benefit for patients in order to make sure that the study balances the scientific objectives with patient safety and well-being, including anticipated side effect severity and what strategies the study team might offer to support those with side effects, and how are they maybe going to educate patients in advance of the trial that if a trial has some more severe potential side effects, that there will be a way that they'll be supported throughout the trial to address those side effects. And one other important question that I ask is, how will the opportunity to enroll and how will the study outcomes be communicated to patients and the broader community? So we know that fewer than 25% of patients are asked to join cancer treatment trials, but 55% of patients said yes in one study when they were asked. And in oncology, only about 6% of patients participate in clinical trials. So that creates real challenges in recruitment and accrual. And the more researchers develop patient education materials and create strategies for engaging patient communities, the more patients will become aware of options that might be a good fit for them. So I also want to look at how will the researcher be encouraging and supporting doctors to have conversations with their patients about the clinical trial. So perhaps what kind of patient education materials are being offered to them, and how will patients or care partners have information that helps them to be comfortable to advocate for themselves and speak up if their doctor isn't sharing information about a clinical trial. So those are some of the key areas that I'm looking for as I evaluate a proposal.
It sounds like you do a lot of proactive work to help to address concerns that patients and their family members might have. Considering this balance that's continually, it sounds like, being struck between certain aspects that might make a trial ideal for a patient versus maybe sometimes aspects that are necessary for the clinical question, but might be less appealing for a participant. Can you tell us what are some of the most common concerns patients have about participating in clinical trials, and what do you do to help address those concerns?
Well, we have a range of barriers that patients face. The logistics are a big part of the barrier. So once a patient is aware of a clinical trial and it's one that they might qualify for, then the next thing that they're going to look at is, how hard is this going to be to manage in my life? How far am I going to have to travel? How many times am I going to have to, go for treatment and things like this? So for those kinds of logistical concerns, the way to address them is in advance, proactively. So if researchers can think ahead to what kind of resources can be provided to cover things like transportation costs, parking, what are the minimum number of tests, procedures, trips to the clinic that can be done without obviously jeopardizing the clinical trial. And in cases where you have maybe more trips than a patient might perceive to be optimal, or maybe more procedures, educating in advance as part of the patient education materials and explaining the why it's important that we have you fill out this questionnaire 3 times is this. So you'll be asked to complete a questionnaire 3 times, and this is the value of doing so. This is how it helps us. If patients understand the motivations behind what they're being asked for, it can take away a lot of the concerns and help them see that it is an important and relevant part of the study. So I think that's helpful information. We also do need to look at the specific challenges for patients from diverse populations. So with rural patients, we've talked already about logistics, travel, and things like that. Looking at how could telehealth be offered as a solution or use of local clinics for some of the local lab tests, things like that. But we also have to look beyond to other parts that make up the diversity. So when you've got patients coming from different cultural backgrounds, there may be a history within the healthcare background that has caused distrust. So we all by now very well know some of the experimental situations that have gone on in the past that have made it very difficult for the Black community, for example, to trust. And so that is something that, again, proactively having research teams that are reflective of diverse populations is a great way. Having materials that are specific to the needs of a culture or somebody with specific linguistic needs. Understanding that in certain cultures there might be many family members who want to show up and hear the information about the clinical trial from the physician and making sure that they're included. So I think thinking ahead to what the concerns are of the different patient populations and then coming up with strategies that you build into the systemic approach is one way to address some of those barriers.
So I wonder if you could share maybe one specific example where patient advocacy feedback really had an impact on a clinical trial design, and how strong was that influence from our patients in impacting that clinical trial design?
We're seeing many cases every day, Dr. Chun, out in social media where we hear from advocates who have contributed insights into the design of a clinical trial that has made things more accessible, that has improved accrual and improved the process for patients. So there's a lot of conversations going on right now about the improvements that we're able to make. In one specific case that I was involved in, I was able to identify a barrier for patients who had a lack of access to technology that was needed for the clinical trial. So we talked about those needs in particular and how to really make it equitable. So the initial solution was to provide tablets to those patients who didn't have internet connection or a tablet at home, to provide that in the clinic during appointment time, which is, it's a wonderful step. But the problem was that it wasn't equitable to what other patients were able to do during the trial, because the other patients could answer questionnaires, during times that worked for them, in the comfort of their own home, in the privacy of their own home. And to their credit, the researcher went back and found the funding to allow clinical trial participants to take the tablet with internet connection home. So they would have the exact same experience that the patients who already had that technology available. And that's really important when you're looking at the data as to how well this intervention is working for patients. Because if you can't use the intervention at home when you need to and want to, then you're really not comparing, apples to apples with the patients who have full access to the protocol or the intervention at any time.
So I really like that example. One question that I have for you as well is, what sort of expectations does NRG Oncology have as a cooperative group organization for its patient advocates? And what advice would you give to new patient advocates looking to, as you've described, impact cancer clinical trial designs?
That's a great question. And I have to credit the NRG Patient Advocate Committee and the work that's been done in the couple of years prior to me joining in 2022 and through into 2023. They've worked really hard to put together an online training program for our advocates so that everyone is consistently trained in what the expectations are, what the processes are, and how to do things like completing an NRG clinical or protocol review. So that's been such a critical piece of really building out our patient advocacy committee. Typically, we do come in with a wide range of experiences. Many advocates come in having been trained through other organizations and work they're doing elsewhere, or with professional skills that are relatable. We do have some NRG advocates who are researchers as well as advocates. So with that wide range, we have to make sure that everybody gets a good, solid, consistent training about the NRG advocate experience specifically. Our role is to make sure that when we're asked to participate in the clinical trial reviews, that we obviously bring all our knowledge and expertise, and also represent the wider views and perspectives of many populations, many patient populations. So it's not just about bringing your story and your personal experience to the feedback that you're providing, but also keeping in mind that you're representing a much broader patient perspective. So be thinking about the needs of somebody in a rural situation, be thinking about the needs of a single parent who has children, and wants to enroll in a clinical trial. So just really thinking, all across the board, what's it like to try to learn about a clinical trial if Spanish is your native language and you either don't speak English or your English is more limited. So we always want to be mindful about representing many different perspectives in the feedback that we're providing. We're expected to be knowledgeable if we are part of a disease site committee, to be knowledgeable about that disease in particular. So we have advocates who are on, the breast committee or, other committees like that. And so it's expected that they are informed and educated at an advocate level. We're not expecting, obviously, people to be medical experts, but from an advocacy standpoint, to understand, the basics of that disease and to continue to learn about that disease. And then, to be supportive of researchers. We're not there to criticize. We are there to partner with, and we're there to, bring up things that sometimes researchers may not think of when it comes to the practicalities of patients engaging in research and what some of those needs may be. So we're really there to, champion specific protocols that we're involved in, that we believe in, and get those, that information out to our communities, to engage in social media and share when we can, to educate further about the work that NRG researchers are doing, and to support the funding of research in general, to remind the public that these studies that we're helping to make sure are patient-centric also need funds. And so it's important for us to create financial support ongoingly for organizations such as NRG.
This is such an important point that you raise about the need for diverse opinions, especially from our patients. When in research, it's so easy to become tunnel visioned and kind of, forget about what, our patients who we serve are actually thinking.
You've really shared a lot of pearls with us today about the tremendous service our patient advocate partners are doing for NRG Oncology. And a little bit of turnabout, what advice would you give to clinical investigators, for instance, like Stephen and I, on how to best collaborate with patient advocates to harness, if you will, the advocacy voice as a resource in trial design and procedures?
3 words: early, often, and after. Bring us in early, bring us in often as you're going through the study design process, and bring us in after when you're ready to, enroll patients, and after when you have the outcome of the research, so that we can share those study results out to the communities and people can learn about what you've learned. They can learn about the value of people participating in clinical trials, and they can share that out with other people that they know, so we can really cascade out the information that comes out of the clinical studies.
Thank you again so much for joining us today and for all of your work as a patient advocate at NRG Oncology, as well as I also want to thank just all the patient advocates involved with NRG Oncology out there. The NRG Oncology Group is supported by grant funding from the National Cancer Institute, and content of this podcast does not necessarily reflect that of the National Institutes of Health. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and happy clinical trials.